Good morning, it's Monday the 6th of June and welcome to Atlantic Capital Markets roundup of the coming week's economic highlights. As always, we'll start with a quick rundown of the key economic numbers being issued this week around the world's markets, and we'll then dive into some of the more significant highlights afterwards and give our own thoughts and analysis. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. So the economic numbers being issued this week start today with an update on the services PMI in China. On Tuesday, we'll get to hear if expectations are correct that interest rates in Australia are to rise when the RBA releases its latest rate announcement. And we'll give our own thoughts on this straight afterwards. Also on Tuesday, an update on German factory orders. Wednesday brings an update on Japanese GDP and GDP also in the Eurozone. And it's the Eurozone's turn on Thursday to release their latest interest rate decision. Again, something that we'll discuss in detail afterwards. Also, Thursday brings us US initial jobless claims update. And on Friday, it's China's CPI. And in the US, the big question of whether the past peak inflation will find fresh evidence one way or the other with the latest release of their CPI figures. And we'll discuss this in more detail afterwards. Finally, on Friday, the US Michigan consumer confidence figures. And the companies that we'll hear updates from this week are as follows. On Monday, we'll hear from Worldwide Healthcare Trust. Tuesday, Schroeder Real Estate Investment Trust. And it's full year results day for Wizz Air on Wednesday, and we'll discuss this in detail afterwards. Also Wednesday brings us results from Workspace Group and Aveva. Thursday brings us a trading update from British American Tobacco, whose share price has enjoyed a good year so far, something that we'll discuss later in today's report in detail. We'll also hear from Tate & Lyle, Mighty Group, and finally on Thursday, one of the lockdown winners, DocuSign, reports its Q1 results amongst very different times, and we'll give our analysis on this towards the end of the video. Well, the Bank of Canada hiked rates by 50 basis points last week and indicated that there are further hikes likely still to come. This week, it's the turn of both the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Eurozone Central Bank to give their interest rate decisions. Well, the RBA is expected to hike by 25 basis points and the ECB to leave rates unchanged. Also last week, the US NFP showed that the labour market remains tight, so investors will be watching closely to see if this translates into higher inflation. Or will US inflation fall for a second straight month, suggesting that inflation is indeed levelling off? Big questions indeed, but from our own humble perspective, we have our own thoughts and analysis on these very subjects, so stick with us as we dive deeper into this week's big stories. It's interest rate decision day in Australia on Tuesday, and the Reserve Bank of Australia is widely expected to raise interest rates by 25 basis points for a second straight meeting, when it meets in June, taking the lending rate to 0.6%. Now, this would mark a slower move than its peers to rein in soaring inflation as the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Bank of Canada, and indeed the Fed all hiked their interest rates by 50 basis points. Now, inflation has risen to a 20-year high of 5.1%, well above the central bank's 2 to 3% target. So some suggest that 25 basis points is actually too slow. The RBA has cited slow wage growth in the labour market not to hike faster. However, more recently, labour market data is starting to show wages rising, which could prompt the RBA to go for an outsized hike. Wizz Air Holdings is due to report full-year results on Wednesday as the share price trades down 40% so far this year. The city is expecting revenues of €1.7 billion compared to €739 million in 2021 and a net loss anticipated of €636 million compared to €482 million last time. Now, there are plenty of headwinds for the sector, such as rising fuel prices, given that the company only uses limited hedging. The outlook will be very much in focus with forward bookings for summer 2022, which are expected to be strong. Trading still being impacted by the conflict in Ukraine, so an update here is also likely. On Thursday, the Eurozone will announce its latest interest rate decision. Eurozone inflation rose to a new record high of 8.1% year-on-year in May, and that was up from 7.4% in April, piling the pressure on the ECB to raise those interest rates. With CPI as high as 8.7% in Germany and in double digits in Eastern European countries, that pressure must be popping rivets across the committee's collective lid. The ECB hadn't initially planned to hike rates this year, even though inflation was rising, even before the Russian invasion. However, more recently, ECB members, including President Christine Lagarde, have adopted a significantly more hawkish outlook, with an interest rate hike now expected as soon as July, which could be a 50 basis point hike, followed by another rate rise in September. But a move this Thursday does appear unlikely, and instead is expected to tee up a move for next month. However, this path is a difficult one to navigate. If the ECB sounds too hawkish, borrowing costs for the more indebted nations such as Greece and Italy could start to become a worry. So as a result, do keep an eye on the Euro and European indices. British American Tobacco are due to release a trading update on Thursday. Well, BATS shares have performed well so far this year, rising 25% year to date. While the tobacco side of the business reported a slight slowdown in the year by 0.4%, this was attributed to slower airport business, as of course the virus kept people away. Instead, revenue from new categories such as vaping rose by 43.4% to just over £2.1 billion, which means that the firm is well on course to meet its target of £5 billion in new category revenue by 2025. Full-year pre-tax profits were $9.16 billion, with a $2 billion share buyback scheme announced. BATS also confirmed that it is withdrawing from Russia. It's also said that annual revenue is expected to grow 2 to 4%. Electronic document manager DocuSign are due to release Q1 results on Thursday. Now, DocuSign were one of the big pandemic winners, but has been struggling recently, trading down some 40% year to date, bringing the share price back to its pre-pandemic level. The share price plunged after it downgraded its Q4 revenue forecast to $557 million and $563 million in Q4. And although revenue came in ahead of forecast, the stock continued to lose ground. Similarly, Q1 guidance was disappointing at $580 million below the $594 million expected. Earnings per share for Q1 is expected at 46 cents a share. Revenue expectations will once again likely be responsible for directing the share price post-release. Finally, on Friday, we'll hear the latest CPI update in the US. Now, in April, US CPI edged lower to 8.3% year-on-year, and that was down from 8.5% in March. While this was a few ticks lower, inflation remains stubbornly high, around a 40-year peak. Meanwhile, core inflation, which strips out the more volatile items such as food and fuel, also slowed to 6.2% in April, and that was down from 6.5% in March. The data suggests that peak inflation has indeed passed. The fall in inflation is expected to be slow, however, given how widespread price rises are across the economy. Expectations are for CPI to edge lower again to 8.2% year-on-year and core CPI to 5.9% year-on-year, which again is a step in the right direction, albeit a very small one. Cooling inflation could pull the US dollar lower and boost US stocks. So those are the big stories of the week. Let's wrap up with a quick look at the dividend announcements due this week. In the FTSE 100, we'll hear from WPP, Associated British Foods, Sainsbury's and Compass Group. And in the FTSE 250, we'll hear from Capital & Counties, Computer Centre, Marshalls, Temple Bar Investments, Assura Shaftesbury, Johnson Matthey, AJ Bell, Integrafin Holdings, Worldwide Healthcare Trust, BMO Commercial Property, Capital Gearing, Ferrexpro and Dr. Martin. So there you have it, inflation and interest rates still dominating the economic headlines. But as always, we're here each week to help guide you through the global cogs and wheels with our expert opinion to keep you right. So as always, thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to click on that subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss out on our regular financial updates with our expert market analysis and opinions. And also, just as a reminder, if you haven't tried it already, why not download our app to your phone or tablet if you do want to keep updated on the latest financial news, as well, of course, as our award-winning trading signals. So until next time, from all of us here at Atlantic Capital Markets, have yourself a great week.